And welcome back. So just as a review, chapter 1 covered off the project management and the difference between a project and project management. We also covered off identification and selection of different projects in chapter 2. And then 3, we went through project proposals. We also covered project planning, and learning unit 5 covered off the use of project management software. Now we get to the more interesting part of scheduling the actual project, and then also understanding how do you utilize your resources. So this learning unit covers 2 chapters, which is chapters 5 and 6, and also then starts off with chapter 5, pages 149 to 166, and then project control, which is theme 2, 166 to 176. If everything is not going according to schedule, it's important to take reactive action to get back onto schedule. In this learning unit, we explored the monitoring and controlling process of a project and updating the project schedule. So let's get going with theme number 1, which is project scheduling. After going through the section, you'll be able to estimate the resources required for the activity, estimate duration, determine the early start and early finish of activities, determine the latest start and latest finish for activities, explain and determine total slack, prepare a project schedule, and identify and explain the critical path. This particular theme is fairly long, so this video will be quite long, and I just want you can take some time, and along the way you can stop and maybe come back to the balance of it. But essentially, estimating the activity resources for your project is quite an important part of the overall project elements. You need to understand the people that you're going to need, the materials you're going to need, the equipment, and the facilities that you're going to need in order to complete your particular project. All of these have influence on the duration of the project, the availability of the resources that they have, the type of resources that you've got access to, sufficient quantity of the resources that you have access to, and activity durations as well. For most projects, especially if you're working in a project internally within an organization, you tend to have scheduling conflicts in which people working on project teams might be also busy with other projects, or they might also be working with their everyday work or workflow as well. And you need to be able to handle those potential conflicts within an organizational sense. You also need to involve a person with expertise in the resource estimate as well. And estimates influence the final costs of the project. Estimating activity durations. Now, ultimately, every single project is sliced up into little tasks, and every one of those tasks is, again, who needs to do it, by when they need to do it, how long is it going to take, and what resources they're going to need. Duration must be the total elapsed time in terms of the entire project. So let's look at an example. You have 2 activities that you have to do. We have to varnish the floors and move back the furniture. And both of these are sequential, in which you first have to varnish the floors and then move back the furniture, obviously. So in terms of the entire textbook, you'll find that the way we allocate and the way we nominate activities is in this little description box. So the activity would be described, in this case, varnish floors and move back furniture. The activity number is allocated in the bottom left-hand corner, and then the estimated duration of how long the activity would take is in the bottom right-hand corner. So in this case, it's activity number 1 that will take 5 days or 5 hours. And this is activity number 2, and that will take maybe 1 hour to complete. So now let's have a look at an example that we're going to be using right through this entire chapter. And that is the consumer market study project. So this is a whole lot of activities that goes into doing the market study. And this is what we call a network diagram. And what we will be doing is I'll take you through what we call a forward pass, or through the project from the left to the right, and that is what we call forward through the project. And I also will come back through the project as well, which is called a backward pass. And what the forward pass does, a forward pass looks at what's the earliest times activities can start and what's the earliest times activities can finish. Early starts and early finishes. And then the backward pass looks at late starts and late finishes. And the intention is to have a look at what the difference between those two are, in order to understand if your project, if you've allocated and estimated sufficient time for all of the activities to take place. Every project has a start, and every task has different completion times. And you need to define the overall window for the project completion. You may not want to commit to a specific date, but projects that not start until the customer has approved the contract, absolutely. Delay in contract signing may impact the project start date. So when you've negotiated, when you've put in your proposal and a client finally signs on the dotted line of the project document, and they accept the proposal, then you need to put that is your start time. And at that point, you also need to ensure that you negotiate and specifically point out to the client when the project is going to start, so that there's no confusion as to what the project start time is. You must set the finish time as a number of days from when the project starts. So this is the process of establishing and developing a project schedule. You need to understand the prior activities for the schedule development. So you need to have a list of all the activities. And guess where we get our list of all the activities? Yes, you guessed it right. We get it from our work breakdown structure. And our work breakdown structure is what gives us the list of all the activities that we need. You then develop and schedule a timetable. So let's go through the early start and early finish times. So early start essentially just means, in this case ES, the earliest time at which a specific activity can begin. That means that this is the absolute earliest that the activity can begin, and the earliest finish time, the absolute earliest time by which a specific activity can be completed. So when does the activity finish? It finishes when it starts on the earliest possible time and then the estimated duration. You then calculate forward through the network diagram. So let's have a look. Here's a good example. So what is the earliest time for the dress rehearsal, and why is it 10? I'll give you a moment to have a look. So why is the earliest time 10? So the dress rehearsal is the activity number, remember the activity description, and the earliest time that the dress rehearsal can start is, early start, remember ES, is on day number 10. And why can it only start at day number 10? Because if you look at all of the other activities that need to take place, practice the skit, make costumes, and make the props, all of these take time. Practice skits takes 5 days, make costumes takes 10 days, and making of the props takes 4 days. And the earliest time the dress rehearsal can take place is when all of these activities are done, which means is that you will look at the one activity which takes the longest to complete. In that case, it is making of the costumes. So the dress rehearsal can only take place once the costumes are complete, which means that if the costumes take 10 days, the earliest time that the dress rehearsal can start is on day 10. The dress rehearsal takes 2 days to complete, which means that the earliest time it can finish, EF, is on day number 12. Make sense? Okay, so now let's have a look at our consumer study. We start on day number 0, and I will be going through this quite quickly, and you can pause just to have a look and possibly also make notes and ask your lecturer about it, which means that, as again, our notation, this is the description, this is the activity number, and 3 is the number of days that Umbali, which is the person responsible, is going to identify the target consumer. So we start on day 0. It takes 3 days to complete, which means that the activity is finished on the earliest the activity can finish, EF, the earliest it can finish is 0 plus 3, early start plus activity duration, which gives you then the earliest time that the activity can finish. So now let's move through the rest of the project fairly quickly. So Mbali starts with identifying target consumers. It takes 3 days and it finishes on day 3. The earliest time that the draft code questionnaire can start is on day 3. It takes 10 days and it is on day 13. Now we're already on day 13 with 2 activities completed. The third activity is the pilot of the questionnaire. That takes 20 days to complete. And the earliest time that that activity can start is when activity number 2 is finished. So it is 13 plus 20 gives you 33. The next set of activities I'm going to go through quite quickly. So it is piloting the questionnaire, takes 20 days, so we're on day 33 already. And then the review of comments in the final questionnaire takes only 5 days, but that can only start on day 33, so it is 33 plus 5 equals 38. Now things get interesting, because remember, if we go back to the network diagram, there's a whole series of activities that can happen, what we call concurrently. So these activities can happen all at the same time. All of them start on day 38 because all of them are dependent on the finalization of the questionnaire. You cannot send out mailing label, or you cannot prepare the mailing labels if you don't have the final questionnaire. You cannot print it if you don't have it. You cannot develop a data analysis software if you don't have the final questionnaire. And you can also not develop software test data if you don't have the questionnaire. So task 5, task 5, task 6, task 7, and task 8 all start on day 38. They have various start and finish times. Now, those were the 4 tasks that all happen concurrently. However, there is task number 9 and task number 10, which are dependent on, task number 9 is dependent on task number 5 and 6. And number 10 is dependent on 7 and 8. Now we need to determine when can task number 9 start if it is dependent on task number 5 and 6. So it can only start once the longest one is complete. So in this case, it is task number 6, which is 48. And then if we look further down, task number 10 can only start when the longest of the 2 tasks, when both of them are complete, and when both of them are complete is on day 50. So it can only start on day 50. There we go. I know it looks a bit squiggly, but essentially now task 9 and 10 is kicking off, and one starts on day 48 and one starts on day 50, and off they go. Now, both of those tasks 9 and 10 are complete, and now task 11 needs to start. Now task 11 can only start on which day can that be? Again, if we think back, what's the earliest it can start? It can only start once both of these activities are complete. And both of these activities would only be complete once the longest, the one that takes the longest amount, is done. In this case, it is on day 113. So day 113, task 11 kicks off, which is Jim inputting the data, and it takes 7 days. So on day 13 plus 7 equals 120. Now the results need to be analyzed, which is task 12, and that goes from 120 days. It takes 8 days. Now we're sitting on day 128. Now you have to prepare the report, which takes another 10 days, and now we are sitting on 138 days. Now the problem is that our client only gave us 130 days for the project to be complete, which means in this case we are 8 days over the project. Now this is the plan. That isn't a problem yet. So that's the plan. We now need to look at why that is. And we can only really look at it once we have a look at all of our activities in our table of early start and early finish, which is our schedule table. And here you'll see there's a breakdown of all the tasks and the person responsible with the duration of those tasks and the early finish and early start times of those. It's not complete, however, because now we need to also look at the latest start and latest finish. And the way we do that is through a backward pass, which means we go back through the network diagram in order to establish what our late start and late finish times is, and that is denoted as LS, late start, and LF, late finish. So the latest a project can start, again, it's in reverse, is when the late finish minus the estimated duration, and you do a backward calculation through the network diagram. Here's a good example. So let's look at why the LF, or the late finish, for printing, postage and brochures is 20. So here's the printing process and brochures. Remember, we're going backward, so we're going from right to left. Why is it 20? It is 20 because instead of the highest amount, we now look at the lowest amount. So instead of it being 25, it is 20, which means that the latest it can start, it cannot start on day 25. The latest it can start is on day 20. And then if it takes 8 days to complete, you take 20 minus 8 gives you 12. All right, so let's go through the network diagram again. Now remember, our early start and our early finish gave us a total of 138, but our required completion time is 130 working days. So now let's do the backward calculation. We start off with the report at the end, and in this case, we start off with what we think and what is required. So in this case, it's 130. So we start off with 130. It takes 10 days to complete, and we're moving to 120. Task number 12 is another 8 days to complete. Now we're sitting on day 112. Moving back. Remember, task days to complete is 130. That is why we're starting off with 130, because that's our target. We're moving back, so we were starting at 112, and then the next activity is activity number 11, and that takes 7 days. So it is 112 minus 7 equals 105 days. But now our network splits into 2 activities. So now we've got 2 sets of activities which is dependent on activity 11. So in this case, let's have a look. When can the mailing of the questionnaires and the testing of the software, when is the latest it can finish? In this case, calculating back, it finishes at 105 days. 105 days, and both takes 5 days, and in this case Steve takes 65 days, So it is minus 65 equals 40. 5 minus 105 minus 5 equals 100 days. Now these two activities now split into two trees, which is preparing of the mailing labels and printing of the questionnaire, and we follow the same process. So on day 40 takes 10 minus 10 equals 30 minus 2 equals 38. There we go. Cebu finishes off on the earliest time that Cebu can start. The latest he can start with testing of the software is on day 100, which means that the data analysis, the latest it can finish is on day 100. It takes 12 days, which leaves us with 88 and 98. Now we're moving back again. Remember, we're moving from right to left, and we have our set of activities. Now finally we have the two sets of activities that flows into one. Now you need to make a decision out of these four, which one when is the latest that the review of comments can take place. So we look at the lowest number. Instead of looking at the highest number, we look at the lowest number. So it's 38, 30, 88, and 98. So it is on day 30. That means that on day 30 is the latest that the review of comments and the finalization of the questionnaire can take place. That takes 5 days, which leaves you onto day 25. Then we look at activity number 4 and activity number 3. Now finally we get to activity number 3 and activity number 2. Now already you can see that we've run out of time. So by the time we reach activity number 2, you see we're already sitting on day 5, but activity 2 takes 5 days to complete. So we're now sitting at -2. And then finally at activity number 1, we're sitting at -8 days. Which essentially means that the project is 8 days late at the start. But now we know, in terms of all the activities that we need to complete, that 130 days is not realistic for this entire project to be completed. Alternatively, we have to look into the different elements of the project and look at where we can reduce certain activity times in order to get to the 130 days that the client wants us to complete the project in. We draw up our schedule, we update our schedule table with our late start and our late finish times, and you'll see why this table is important right now. In our next section, we'll talk about slack, and slack is just the difference between the early start and finish and the late start and finish. Thank you.